I was 16 and in search of a new gaming PC to purchase on Craigslist. I had just gotten my first job and wanted to reward myself after receiving my first paycheck. I spent a lot of time online every day after work, browsing through various listings. Eventually, I came across an intriguing offer: a 3-year-old Alienware with decent specifications, priced at only $200. The seller mentioned in the description that they had recently upgraded to a newer PC and no longer needed this one, but assured that it still functions perfectly fine. I reached out to him via email and received a prompt response. We engaged in a series of messages, discussing our plans before deciding to meet up the following day. I was instructed to rendezvous with him at a designated grocery store parking lot at 8:00 p.m. It was quite a distance away, so I proposed an alternative location where we could meet halfway. However, he came up with a series of excuses for why he couldn't do that. He claimed to be busy all week and unable to travel far. He insisted that if I wanted it, I would have to pick it up near him. Although I found this a bit frustrating, I still believed the deal was worthwhile and agreed to pick it up in the morning. I pondered the situation further and almost decided to cancel the arrangement. However, he sent me a few videos to demonstrate that the PC was functioning properly. He also assured me that if any problems arose, he would provide a refund. This reassured me, so I proceeded with the purchase, even though it required a 35-mile drive. Minutes away from the grocery store, he instructed me to meet him right as I pulled into the parking lot. I noticed a truck parked in the far corner of the parking lot, standing alone amidst the darkness. The grocery store's lights were eerily off, giving the impression that it had already closed down. It struck me as odd, considering that meeting at a grocery store was supposed to be a safe and public location. It seemed like the purpose of choosing this place was being undermined. Despite having driven for almost 40 minutes, I decided to pull in and hope for the best. I parked by his truck and got out. The man sitting inside leaned over and looked down from his window. He didn't acknowledge my presence at all. His gaze was fixed downwards, as if he was scrutinizing every inch of me. It sent shivers down my spine, making me feel incredibly uneasy. Stepping out of the vehicle, he revealed himself to be an older man, perhaps in his late 40s or 52nds. His thinning brown hair and a brief glance at his face gave off an unsettling vibe. I instinctively kept my distance, standing a few feet away as he proceeded to wander around and unlock the back door of the car. I could see the computer sitting there, silently waiting. On the seat, but not the one closest to us. It was on the other seat, further inside the truck. He then pointed into the truck and said I could take it out and look at it. His hand was still on the door, and he just watched me, waiting for me to crawl in and grab it. I stood there, feeling a sense of unease as my gaze shifted back and forth between him and the truck. Then, I noticed a small but significant detail: the handle on the inside of the door that he was holding open was missing. It didn't require much intelligence to deduce what this meant. Instinctively, I began to retreat from him, my steps quickening as I hurriedly made my way to my car. He shouted for me to return, but I quickly accelerated. The man hurriedly got into his truck, but instead of pursuing me, he drove off in the opposite direction. There is no question that if I had crawled into his back seat, he would have forcefully closed the door, trapping me inside with no way to escape. It was clear that it was a dangerous setup. Unfortunately, all I had was his email to send to the police, but it couldn't be traced. I can only hope that nobody else falls into his trap. Gets caught in a chilling Craigslist deception. I've checked multiple times since then to see if his ad was back up for the PC, hoping to catch him and report him to the authorities. However, I haven't come across anything yet. It's possible that he's using a different alias and attempting to scam people with a different item. My suggestion would be to steer clear of Craigslist. I was browsing through Craigslist to search for a condo or a room in a house to temporarily reside in for a few months. Unlike most conventional apartments that only offer 1-year leasing terms, Craigslist was teeming with private owners who were renting out their places or rooms. Not only were these options usually more affordable, but the owners were also more open to negotiating the length of the lease. I had approximately a month to conduct my search, and during that time, I explored several options. However, at the last minute, all of them fell through. Eventually, I stumbled upon another place that seemed quite similar to the previous ones. It was a room available for rent in a home located just 20 minutes away from my location. The individual who listed it happened to be a young person of 22 years. After reaching out, we exchanged texts for a few days before finally scheduling a time for me to view the room. However, when I arrived at the street where his address was located, my excitement dwindled. The houses appeared dilapidated and neglected, with overgrown yards and junk scattered across the front lawns. It seemed like this was the best one could afford in this area. Despite my reservations, I decided to give it a chance and parked in the driveway. Unfortunately, the house looked just as neglected as the others. Undeterred, I stepped out of the car and pressed the doorbell, only to find that it didn't work. I could hear heavy footsteps approaching from the other side. There was an unsettling pause that seemed to last forever before he finally opened the door slightly, revealing only half of his face. Nervously, I smiled and answered his question about my name. He then opened the door fully and invited me inside. The man was tall and somewhat thin, with shoulder-length hair and visible tattoos on his neck. It was clear that he was older, possibly in his mid-30s or even older. I found myself already inside the house. Following him through the hallway, the man was moving at an incredibly fast pace, as if he wanted to show me everything in a hurry. He was talking non-stop, making it difficult for me to process the situation or fully grasp its strangeness. The kitchen had seen better days, with its worn-out appearance and cabinets that were barely holding on to their hinges. He didn't linger there for long, quickly making his way into the next hallway. 2 doors stood before him, and he approached the first one, turning to address me. "This will be your room," he said as I cautiously stepped inside. The man motioned for me to take a look around. In that brief moment, I managed to collect my thoughts and decided it was best to proceed with the tour, despite my growing unease. However, before I could fully process my decision, the man's expression darkened and his anger became palpable. Without uttering a single word, he began to approach me, his intentions unclear. I swiftly retreated as he matched my speed and began advancing more rapidly towards me. I quickly raced down the hallway, my heart pounding as I hastily made my way out of the house. The sound of him stopping at the front door and forcefully slamming it shut echoed in my ears. I couldn't help but berate myself for ever stepping foot into that place, knowing deep down that something was amiss. Although nothing technically occurred, every sign pointed towards a horrifying outcome. From that moment on, the mere thought of using Craigslist again filled me with an overwhelming sense of terror. Living on the East Coast, there's a plethora of homesteads and off-grid cabins scattered throughout the area. Many of these properties, although not completely off-grid, are situated in remote locations with vast expanses of land, often exceeding 40 acres. It is customary in this region to purchase second-hand tools and equipment from neighbors or other locals. At the time, I found myself engaged in construction work on my property and required a flatbed trailer for my truck to transport additional materials from hardware stores. These trailers can be exorbitantly priced, but fortunately, due to the prevalence of such trailers in the area, there is a substantial market for used ones. I decided to browse through Craigslist, hoping to find what I was looking for. Surprisingly, there were quite a few options available. I reached out to several sellers, but unfortunately only one of them responded. Thankfully, we were able to arrange a convenient time for me to visit. What I knew before starting this venture was that his name was Devin, and he possessed what I required. This was a routine occurrence in this area, something I had done countless times before, so I had no concerns. I embarked on a journey of approximately an hour from my residence, traversing mostly national forest roads until I arrived at his residence. The driveway resembled those commonly found in this area, a narrow gravel path leading into the depths of the woods. I proceeded through it and parked in front of his modest and compact house. The decrepit wooden cabin emerges from the dense forest, standing alone in a small clearing. As I approached the property, something immediately caught my attention. There was no sign of a flatbed trailer anywhere. Considering its size, it couldn't have been easily hidden. I assumed that perhaps it was stored in a garage or shed at the back of the property. Parking my car on the grass, I stepped out and waited for a moment, hoping the owner would come out to greet me. When no one appeared, I made my way to the porch and knocked on the door. As I waited, it was impossible to determine if any of the lights were on inside. The windows were concealed by curtains, and the sun was slowly setting, casting an eerie atmosphere. It was difficult to determine the situation after waiting for a full minute. No one had come to the door, and I began to wonder if nobody was even home. Suddenly, I received a text from Devin, instructing me to go around to the back of the cabin where he had the trailer. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, but I also considered the possibility that I might be surprised out in the backyard. As I strolled around, I couldn't help but take in my surroundings. The moment I glanced around the corner, all I could see were towering trees. Continuing my walk, I paused by the side of the cabin right before reaching the back. To my surprise, there was no open space behind the cabin, only an endless expanse of woods stretching as far as the eye could see. Feeling a sense of unease, I decided it was time to head back to my truck. However, out of nowhere, I caught a faint sound coming from behind me. I turned and scanned the woods, but couldn't spot anything. It seemed like someone or something was approaching from just around the corner. I continued walking, my pace quickening, as I heard loud footsteps pushing through the grass behind me. I only caught a fleeting glimpse of the individual rushing towards me before I swiftly made my way to my vehicle. I'm not sure if he surrendered immediately or had alternative plans, but when I entered and glanced back at the cabin, the man had vanished. I swiftly departed from the scene and made my way to the closest town, where I promptly reached out to the authorities. The situation was quite unsettling. Surprisingly, the state had no knowledge of any cabin constructed on that land, which was supposed to be unoccupied. Upon investigation, it became evident that the cabin had been abandoned, with no indication of any intention to sell me anything. It became clear that the individual I encountered had ulterior motives, possibly with harmful intent. My suspicion is that he was lurking along the back wall of the cabin, waiting for an opportunity to ambush me. Fortunately, I had a sense that something was amiss and decided not to venture all the way back there. It's hard to say what might have happened if I had. Back in 2013, when I was 22 years old, I decided to sell an old computer that I had. It wasn't in the best condition, so I didn't think it was worth taking to a shop However, I believed that someone else might still find some use for it. Craigslist was the only platform I was familiar with for posting and selling items. It seemed like a convenient site where locals could find good deals. I had confidence in the safety of my neighborhood, so I didn't hesitate to list my PC on the site. Within a day, I received an email from someone willing to pay me the listed price, assuming it worked as I assured him it did. I assured him he could test it out when he picked it up, and we agreed to do the exchange the following morning. He introduced himself as Cameron and promised to send me an email when he was on his way. The next day, I woke up early and patiently waited until 11 o'clock a.m., the time he was supposed to show up. I was expecting his email to confirm his arrival, but it never came. By 11:15, with no email or any signs of him coming, I decided to open up the blinds and watch TV while keeping an eye outside. Casey, my anxiety, started to creep and appear out of nowhere at around 11:45. I caught a glimpse of a car creeping down the road. It inched closer and closer to the front of my house, finally halting right at the curb. Frantically sprinting, convinced that they were right behind. I paused the TV and waited, but several minutes passed without any movement or the car turning off. Then, out of nowhere, they abruptly turned back onto the road and drove away. I rose from my seat and approached the window, gazing out at the road with a sense of unease. A perplexing sight caught my attention, leaving me bewildered. Uncertain if it was Cameron or a mere stranger who happened to halt there, I swiftly shut the blinds, seeking solace in the darkness. In an attempt to clarify the situation, I reached out to Cameron via email, inquiring about his arrival. However, to my dismay, no response ever arrived. After an hour of fruitless waiting, I decided to abandon my anticipation and carry on with my day, pushing the peculiar incident to the recesses of my mind. I had a satisfying lunch and later enjoyed a delicious dinner. Feeling tired, I decided to retire early at 9 o'clock p.m. since I had an important work day ahead. Falling asleep swiftly, I was startled awake sometime later. Glancing at the clock, I realized it was only 11 o'clock, a mere 2 hours since I had drifted off. Hoping to resume my slumber, I closed my eyes once more, but my efforts were interrupted by a barely audible thump. Causing my eyes to snap open again, I lay there in silence, my senses heightened, straining to catch the sound once more. Moments later, it echoed through the house again, originating from somewhere below. It was an unfamiliar noise, one that filled me with uncertainty. Concerned that there might be an issue with the house, I mustered the courage to rise from my bed and venture into the hallway. With each step, the sound grew louder. No longer a mere faint thud, but something much more unsettling. I cautiously tiptoed through the kitchen, my footsteps barely making a sound. As I rounded the corner into the back hall, I found myself peering down a dimly lit corridor. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the house, seemingly coming from the far end. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out the faint silhouette of a figure moving just outside the window. I felt a sudden jolt as my heart skipped a beat, followed by a loud thud that rattled the window. Startled, I instinctively took a step back from the mysterious figure. I stood still and faced the window, my heart pounding as the shadow gradually took shape. Their face pressed against the glass, their eyes locking onto mine. It was a terrifying moment that seemed to stretch on for minutes, although it was only a fleeting second or two. Without hesitation, they swiftly retreated and disappeared into the distance. I wasted no time and immediately ran to call the police. However, It was clear that they had managed to escape before anyone could catch them. Although it initially appeared to be a straightforward case involving the man from Craigslist, Cameron, it turned out to be far more complicated. There was no concrete evidence linking him to the incident, aside from the fact that it occurred on the same day I was supposed to meet him. I never discovered their true intentions, but I did notice that the bolt securing the window had marks on the outside, as if someone had tried to force it open. I never delved further into the matter and decided to avoid using Craigslist altogether.